Again, it's not about exercise, it's not about physical activity per se, it's about, are you keeping your muscles active? And so the moment you get up and stand, for instance, that alone activates the muscle saying, we're doing something. We're going to start burning some triglycerides or so on. We're going to utilize glucose. Being sedentary is really what you're trying to avoid. So it doesn't matter in this realm of physical activity versus exercise. It's better that you keep moving. Pick your movement du jour. It could be anything. So you can get up, if you're in an office setting, just getting up from your desk, walking around twice and sitting back down is enough for the next 30 to 60 minutes to tell your body we're still actively involved as the muscles. Most of the energy that's used in the body is by your muscles. It's not used by your body fat. It's not used by your bones. And the organs do have some portion of it, but really the rest is really muscle.
Hey friends, welcome back. It's episode number 239. Today we're talking all things fat loss, exercise, and the difference between activity and physical exercise. I know that sounds a little bit like, what are you talking about? But we're gonna dive into it. At times my beliefs are a little bit challenged. I'm a huge fan of going out, going to the gym, making physical activity part of your lifestyle. But obesity medicine specialist, Dr. Krishna, is going to talk about how just regular activity, going out and gardening, moving around, how that can actually enhance your body's ability to burn fat for fuel and to become more metabolically flexible. So it's a great show. I hope you enjoy it. And this show is brought to you by MYOXCIENCE Nutrition, our very own supplement line that's helping you to burn fat and build muscle with ease while prioritizing your health. Today we're going to talk a lot about fatty acid metabolism, cell membrane health. And one element of that is omega-3 fats for their ability to enhance blood sugar health and support the body's healthy immune response and much more. Most supplements over the counter do not contain an IFA certified, that is the International Fish Oil Standard 5-star certification that looks at oxidation levels, heavy metals, residual solvents, and also nuclear fallout from Fukushima. So our Monosorb 1300 meets that criteria. So I'd encourage you to check that out. If you're interested in learning more about it, I'll be following the comments below and the links below are to that, as well as more information about the IFA certification and fish oil quality and third-party testing. All right, let's dive back into the show. Thanks so much as always for tuning in.
Yeah, on the medical weight loss side, not the surgical weight loss side. But we have to collaborate with surgeons to see when is it a good time to offer surgery.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel, we rolling in? Yeah. Do you ever feel that, or under which scenarios or contexts would bariatric surgery be indicated in your situation? In your practice?
Well, if you've exhausted pretty much everything there is to do, or your health is in such jeopardy that you have to do something now, bariatric surgery is the way to go. And then there's a criteria. If you have 2 or more of these kind of indications, if your BMI is such and so on. But even if you wanted to qualify for bariatric surgery, you first have to attempt to lose some weight to show that, hey, you're not relying just on surgery to say, this is the only way I'm going to get better.
So I think the public perception is that surgeons are just sitting there waiting for patients to come in, but that's not really the case. That's kind of, media has maybe taken that a little bit too far. So
I think there's a lot more availability though. Even on insurance plans, that possibility to do bariatric surgery is going up. There's actually a little bit of legislation on that side where that is saying insurance companies should say, well, if you have a heart attack and you need a bypass, shouldn't you be able to get that bypass covered under insurance? And the answer is yes. People wouldn't turn down someone who is having a heart attack and saying you need a bypass. The same is actually true for medical weight loss. It's not on the medical side, of course, we're talking about on the surgical side. But there comes a point now to say that, and the American Medical Association accepted the fact that obesity is a chronic condition. And so now it's just a matter of whether can it be covered under insurance. And that's actually available, but the question then becomes, well, what if you have complications? What if you said, I got my stomach stitched or closed off, or the bypasses, all the different kinds, and then you have some leaking after the fact, a complication of the surgery, where insurance companies are currently saying that, well, that's not covered. Well, yeah, I don't know, any surgeon would say, you have 0 chances of complications after the surgery. So actually the Obesity Medicine Association, the OMA, is like trying to fight for that on the Hill by saying that, hey, we should allow for not only just the surgical part, and we're also, working on the legislative part, like saying that medical weight loss medications should be an easy mainstay first-line treatment, along with nutrition, along with counseling. All of that is important. But surgeons probably have it the hardest in that sense.
Yeah. So what would be the complication rate, would you say? I mean, is it like 2%, 5%? Is it?
There are several different kinds of surgeries, but and I can't speak, intelligently about the exact percentages, but you can assume somewhere between 1% and 5% might have complications, either short-term complications, like right after the surgery, or long-term complications.
Mm-hmm. Well, along those lines, long-term, what does it look like, the prognosis? So someone is morbidly obese. They've exhausted a lot of nutritional stuff that we're going to talk about. So it's the core of your practice. They get recommended surgery. 10 years down the line, what's successful in terms of like improving blood sugar regulation, keeping the weight off? Because we do hear about this rebound of the weight gain. Then at that point, then what?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of good studies done by members of the OMA who've shown that whether you take a medication or you get surgery, they'll kind of pan these patients out 2 to 5 years out, and found that a lot of surgical patients end up getting what you call rebound weight gain. And that's true. And it's about the same between surgery and medication. So then it begs the question, should you even get surgery if the rebound amount, the amount you regain over 2 to 5 years, is about the same? And they both also similarly, their initial weight loss is about the same. So surgery, you'll have a little bit more dramatic weight loss in the first 1 to 3 or 4 months, but it's really after you go past that little early period, medications has the exact same amount of weight loss. It just takes a little bit longer, but both patients will get there equally.
That's interesting.
So when you think about, one is surgery is you can't reverse it, generally speaking, whereas medications you can always stop it at any time. Mm-hmm. So that rebound, there's a lot of different reasons for that. Surgically speaking, though, I think the body takes on a new metabolism approach to the new surgery, whether it's decreased digestive enzymes, change in microbiota, or whatever it might be, hormonal changes as well. On the medication side, there's always the challenge of nutritional lifestyle changes. So the idea is that you're not changing your nutrition just temporarily to lose weight. It's just got to be more permanent. And so does the physical activity. And we know that physical activity doesn't, at least in the OMA, we know that it doesn't cause weight loss. It prevents weight regain. That's known in the large registry that's maintained to see when people enter their information in how much physical activity, exercise you're getting per week or per month or per day. And it's the same thing, the same answer. Those who do more physical activity are able to keep the weight off, not that it causes weight loss.
Interesting. So that's kind of sussed out in these big epidemiological studies. So obviously you recommend exercise as part of a healthy lifestyle, but you do caution people that exercise alone may not help you to lose 200 pounds.
That's correct. Actually, you said a word that is probably misunderstood. I mean, everyone understands that it has a connotation of what is exercise, and exercise has a definition, and physical activity has a different definition. So just touching on that for just a moment.
Sure.
Exercise means that you're doing something without necessarily purpose, although you could say, well, isn't the purpose of getting on a treadmill to lose weight? But no, it just really doesn't serve a purpose. It's not like, say, for instance, you're gardening with the idea, let me get the weeds out, let me make my plants grow. And that's a physical activity or an activity of daily life. So rather than talk about exercise, and everyone thinks that exercise is about repetitive things over and over, that's not what we would necessarily recommend. It should be a physical activity. It's something that you would do in your life that is not always the same. So one day it could be walking, one day it could be dancing, one day it could be gardening, next day it could be cutting the lawn. So those are all forms of physical activity. Exercise also has this description of being aerobic or anaerobic. Just simply put, if it's anaerobic, if I walk up to you and try to make a conversation with you, you'd be out of breath. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of exercise or physical activity I don't recommend it, because you're actually, not to get into the biochemistry of it all, but you're going to start producing more lactic acid, and you got to make up for it later on. And so you can't burn body fat during that time as efficiently.
It's more in that post-workout window where the fat is kind of burned. But I like this approach because it's really doable for a lot of people. You're not telling them to go do battle ropes and pull-ups and things that maybe biomechanically they can't do. You're telling them to just have more regular activity that's undulating. Like you said, one day you're raking leaves, one day you're mowing the lawn, one day you're, picking up the kids, whatever. Right. So that's really manageable for people that are sedentary.
Right, and it doesn't really require any special kind of equipment. Anyone can go outside and walk. You don't need a membership for it. You just need a pair of shoes. Even if it's raining, grab an umbrella.
So if there was tools, we could talk about Fitbits and things. How can we quantify if people are doing enough physical activity? Is it 10,000, 20,000 steps? Where do you like people to go for weight loss?
Yeah, that's another little hot topic as to how much physical activity do you need. And it's not about exercise, it's not about physical activity per se, it's about, are you keeping your muscles active? And so the moment you get up and stand, for instance, that alone activates the muscles saying, we're doing something. We're going to start burning some triglycerides or so on. We're going to utilize glucose. Being sedentary is really what you're trying to avoid. So it doesn't matter in this realm of physical activity versus exercise. It's better that you keep moving. Pick your movement du jour. It could be anything. So you can get up, if you're in an office setting, just getting up from your desk, walking around twice and sitting back down is enough for the next 30 to 60 minutes to tell your body we're still actively involved as the muscles. Most of the energy that's used in the body is by your muscles. It's not used by your body fat. It's not used by your bones. And the organs do have some portion of it, but really the rest is really muscles.
Mm-hmm. So to burn meaningful levels of energy, aka fat, you need to just move your muscles more.
Correct. And that's probably a lot of people have heard that sitting is the new kind of smoking.
Yeah, scary to think about. So, it's funny, I know a lot of people that don't recreational exercise, but have a lot of physical activity for their occupation, and their body weight doesn't fluctuate. They don't put on the winter 15 or whatever. It stays very constant. Even though their diet, to be totally honest, some of the people I'm thinking of, is not the best in the world, but they have relatively good glycemic responses and don't put on the body weight with age. So I think what you're saying is really, people need to resonate with that. And I guess the only potential downside to recreational activity is, like you said, it's expensive. You got to most oftentimes have a gym membership. And the risk for getting injured can be high for certain people. And then that causes sedentary behavior, right? So Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's actually very physiological in the sense that this whole idea of exercise was only recently created. And what I mean recently is gyms didn't actually pop up for public use until the early 70s. And prior to that, the only people who went to the gyms were either Olympic athletes or boxers. And so, again, this idea that you have to exercise in order to lose weight is really false. People weren't exercising prior to that. Obesity wasn't an issue until the early 1930s when it really took off. What were people doing before that? Well, they were doing things in their life. And we hate to compare ourselves to other animals. But there's no animal in the world, except for the human animal, that does exercise. And so lions don't say, well, I think I need to go run around the safari a couple of times today because I'm putting on weight. It just doesn't happen. There's a lot of self-regulation. It's just that our foods are, I think, completely adulterated now, that we have to do other things.
Now, do you think that, I mean, I don't think, do you think exercise is bad? Is that what I hear you saying? Or do you think that it's maybe not totally natural and it may be compensating for something that you should be normally doing in your day?
Well, the issue with exercise, and if you can kind of say, well, what is, again, aerobic or anaerobic exercise? And I hear about all of these, what's the best word I can use? Those kind of exercises that raise your heart rate, whether it's the CrossFit or all the other ones that are similar to that, orange therapy or so on. They raise the heart rate beyond a level that they shouldn't sustain at for longer periods of time. Physiologically speaking, our heart rates are only supposed to go up during times of fight or flight. And the response hormone to that is cortisol. And if you generate cortisol beyond the typical use, cortisol, we now know, causes midsection weight gain. And it's probably the most difficult kind to get rid of, is the kind of fat that builds up in the midsection, the kind you can't pinch. And that's almost 100% cortisol effect. It's an anti-inflammatory hormone. It's a stress hormone. So you have to ask, the question should be, why am I stressing out the body? And you shouldn't. So say, for instance, walking around your neighborhood isn't stressful unless, I guess, a dog chases you. But that's about the only time. So I don't recommend stressful physical activity or stressful exercise. With that said, probably one of the best things, if you want to use the word exercise, is the intermittent type, where you're going fast, then going slow for a longer period of time, fast, slow, and repeating that. And again, only for just a limited period of time, 15 to 20 minutes is very good.
Yeah, so the prolonged, more stress-inducing exercise, steady state running, high-intensity stuff may not be beneficial. And I have a small side story. I used to do a lot of competitive bike racing, want to be a professional and stuff like that. And we would go on these group rides on weekends, and these guys that I would train with would start training to 4, 6, sometimes we do 6, 7 hour rides on a weekend. And some of the guys that I would train with, they would start to get a belly. And I thought, that is so crazy. Like, they're burning literally 4,000 calories in one sitting. I know they're not eating like 8,000 calories a day, maybe 6,000, but they're still getting a belly. And so the cortisol,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, and the younger you are, cortisol is much more manageable because you have the balancing hormone to that, DHEA. But as we get older, and it could be whether it's just age-related versus, wow, as we get older, we have more stressors in our life, so we start to run out of DHEA. But cortisol, you never run out of necessarily. You have to maintain a certain amount of cortisol in your body. Otherwise, you can't survive more than a week without it. And so, yes, this is why as we get older, it becomes more difficult to lose that midsection because we're losing the amount of DHEA that we would produce to balance out cortisol.
So it's more catabolic in nature. So the DHEA will kind of neutralize
That's
the
correct.
catabolism.
Now you're living in a catabolic state.
Mm-hmm. So along those lines, as an obesity medicine specialist, do you recommend DHEA for people?
I would only recommend DHEA if you actually measured the levels. So you should not be taking DHEA without knowing what your levels are. And you can go into the testing. There's some better testing than others, blood versus urine versus saliva testing. I usually only measure urine or saliva levels of DHEA.
Mm-hmm. So as long as physiologically it's low, people have symptoms, then you recommend it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then really just temporarily until you can correct why you have low DHEA levels, getting back to the kind of the root cause of why anything is the way it is.
Yeah. We know that the fat tissue can make its own aromatase and kind of can aromatase androgens. Do you see that often clinically?
Yes. In my clinic, I measured that to see, where are they, how are they functioning in terms of testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, the 3 kinds of estrogens, and especially for those who are not menopausal, or the male equivalent of that as well. So if you notice that, their hormones, especially their estrogens, are going up, you have to look at how do you get rid of them? How do you detoxify them of those hormones? So whether is it a genetic issue, is it a liver issue, is it a peripheral adipose tissue, excess to adipose tissue issue, it has to be addressed. But yes, that's important as well. And it's a very big concern, because we do know in obesity medicine, excess body fat, yeah, it has the aesthetic part, but there's all the chronic conditions, including cancer, that comes with it. So whether you're producing extra dihydrotestosterone or extra estrogens, they're men or women, that's going to be a great cancer-creating environment.
Yeah. So what are some natural ways? I mean, obviously losing the weight can help, right? But how can we help to mitigate that so that the environment is not so problematic and fostering these chronic diseases?
Well, at the end of the day, the body wants to get rid of all kinds of hormones. The only place you can destroy hormones and get rid of them, at least the ones that are relevant for weight loss and cancer, is the liver. So if the liver's not functioning well, or it's so busy doing other things, then the ability to break down those hormones and get rid of them through metabolites is huge. So you can maximize the liver by doing several different things. There's several products I can think of that are on the available, nutritionally speaking. One of them is Ursodeoxicolic acid, or the nutritional one is called TUDCA. It's got a taurine molecule on it. And TUDCA will actually improve detoxification at the liver. That's probably one a lot of people have not heard of. People have heard of other ones like milk thistle and all the other ones that are more of the botanicals. But ursodeoxycholic acid is naturally made by the liver, but you're now taking it in a supplement form. And TUDCA has a very strong effect to get rid of metabolites. The other one is to make sure that you don't recirculate those hormones that you're just trying to kick out from the liver, and that's the gastrointestinal tract. Here there's a variety of different things, but the easiest one is soluble and insoluble fiber. And you can improve or prevent the reabsorption of hormones and metabolites that way. And it's probably also the reason why vegan and vegetarian type of eating nutritional plans are so good, is that they're high in fiber. They're good for the microbiota, but they're also good for this enterohepatic recirculation of hormones and toxins. So one of the things I noticed is that as people lose weight, and we were earlier talking about that rebound or plateauing of weight loss, is that the adipose tissue releases, it's a great reservoir for lipid-soluble toxins. But when you lose weight, all those toxins, hormones, all get released, and they have to go somewhere, and they go to the liver. But like I said, the liver can only handle so much. And personally, in my practice, as people are losing weight, I have this rule. If you lost 8 to 10 pounds of body fat, it's about time to do a detox, because then the liver can work on more body fat to get rid of.
That's brilliant. And process everything that the fat tissue is releasing.
Yes. Yeah. We accumulate a lot of biotoxins over our life.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much there that I would love to just kind of unpack, and the importance of just defecating, going number 2, because you mentioned this enterohepatic recirculation. Yeah. So if we're constipated, we're not moving our bowels, what's happening to all the things that we're trying to excrete?
It's just like a dirty pail of water. You're just stirring the dirt around with nowhere for it to go. You just muddied up the water.
So what's like a good frequency after every meal? Should someone be going to the bathroom twice a day? What do you recommend?
Well, and not to kind of get off the topic, but then it goes to the idea of how frequently should you be eating. And we probably eat too many times a day. You really should be kind of focusing on hunger. Are you hungry or not? If you're not hungry, you probably shouldn't be eating. But if, let's say you are. So ideally, if you eat, you should be going to the bathroom. And you should think of the best example of that is a baby. Anyone who's had a baby knows that you feed one time and about 10, 15 minutes later, the baby poops. And so you feed the baby 8 times, the baby poops 8 times in a day or more. And so this is also another major issue, I think, for people, not just from a medical weight loss standpoint or a weight loss standpoint, but just really from a health standpoint. Many people aren't going. It's the least, no one wants to talk about it at a dinner party. Hey, how many times are you going today or yesterday? But I find that 50% of my patients, they just think it's normal that they're not going every day. It's just became so mainstay for them. They're going every other day or every third day. And so reversing that out, is very beneficial.
It seems like there's a lot of neuroplasticity that maybe need to retrain there. Because like the other example I think of is my dogs. I feed them, an hour later, if I don't let them out, it's going in the house somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it seems that we lost this, like you mentioned, we should eat when we're hungry. And then we lost these satiety signals, and then we probably lost the signals that or suppressed them because we were embarrassed to go to the bathroom in a certain period of time, or we're in school. So how do you it seems like there's some neuroplasticity that needs to be rewired. I'm just guessing, but what do you do? Obviously there's magnesium, there's supplements, but how do we really, from a root cause level?
Well, the first thing to do is really always change the nutritional plan. It's got to be clean. You can't be exposing yourself to processed foods. And there's a lot of them, even in the medical weight loss field, where people say, well, why not a meal replacement plan? Well, might be beneficial for some if you're on the go, just not very good at cooking. But I suggest that people eat real food. You just got to get rid of commercial packaged food. That alone usually solves 50% of the cases. The other 50% is where you start to look for things like, is your gut microbiota imbalanced? Do you need to detoxify the liver? Do you need to get up and walk? When you sit on your butt, that's a signal to the brain that it's not okay to go. So many of us sit all day long, truck drivers, desk jobs, you name it. So we kind of tease out all the different ways to get the bowels moving. But like I said, nutrition is by far the most important. So I recommend that people eat if you look at your plate, if you're non-vegetarian, your plate needs to be at least 3/4 fresh vegetables and a variety of them. And that usually, like I said, fixes the problem in the vast majority of the people. Beyond that, if they're already doing that and they say, well, the more vegetables I eat, the more constipated I get, I hear that too. So that's the time to avoid completely any raw vegetables or fruits and go to cooked. Cooked foods, cooked vegetables, minimally cooked, is much easier to digest. And the digestive tract will be able to work its way through a little bit better.
So is that more of a function of advanced age that you see this, or is this just people that, the inability to tolerate? Because it seems like raw, obviously a variety is good. So, if you steam broccoli versus roast it versus have raw, there's different levels of phytonutrients that are all beneficial. So I think variety is good there. But, basically the question is, do we want to get to a point where we can tolerate raw?
Yes, because cooking is just a human invention. So no other animal cooks, just like no other animal goes and exercises just for fun. And so this is, again, a man-made thing, along with all the other things that we do, that we got to get away from this idea of cooking if you can. And it goes to, and I can think of lots of different people, is, again, the idea of vegan, all natural. I'm not saying that vegan is the best way. I'm just saying that there is a lot of good reasons to go that way, where you're eating raw foods all the time. But that's also raw meats, which no one's going to eat raw chicken. I can't get anyone convinced to eat raw chicken, but maybe other raw kind of things. Yeah, but yes, we do need to get back to that.
That's brilliant. Yeah, there's that whole theory of kind of uncooked, and you absorb these enzymes, and there's kind of some enzymatic borrowing of sorts, and the food is more bioactive. I don't know that there's a lot of research there, but this whole raw food movement kind of took off in the last decade. Do you follow that personally?
Yes, because, and I've lectured on this before, And the idea of processed foods, and the question becomes, well, what's processed? Well, the moment you pick it from the ground and you start to do anything to it, it's processed. Pan frying is processed. Freezing is processed. I mean, you don't have to think about ultra processed foods. For, say, for instance, a Twinkie, that's ultra processed. But so are even the foods that even are labeled organic, non-GMO at your grocery store. They picked it several days ago in a field, irradiated it, exposed it to carbon dioxide, and then finally it's gotten to the grocery store. Otherwise, food starts to rot the moment you pick it up off the tree or off the ground. So, that's where, again, I think a vegan, vegetarian, raw has a superiority in terms of nutritional value because those vitamins and minerals are all maintained.
Yeah, it's very fresh.
It's nutrient dense at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's tempting for a lot of paleo people and even ketogenic people that identify with that diet to trash vegans and vegetarians because it's, they're not getting the B12 or the iron or what have you, which are easy to supplement with. But at the same side, a lot of people that ascribe to those diets, eat more packaged food. It's like the epic bar, and all this packaged stuff. And so it's really kind of hitting home for me that, there is a happy medium here that, maybe if you do have some raw meat periodically or even cooked occasionally, but like having a lot of raw vegetables, like you're saying.
Well, there's quite a bit of research data that shows that any kind of cooked food, doesn't matter if it's cooked meat, cooked vegetables, cooked fruits, cooked nuts and seeds. The moment you cook them, you brown it in any manner, you've created a carcinogen. So again, the idea of minimally processed foods is about the best I think we can do because we all live in a busy world. We all have jobs or kids or whatever it might be, and you got to do something to streamline your life. And so I do recommend that if you can minimally process them, like sous vide cooking would be one for meats, or eating rare. There's, again, data that shows that the inflammation goes way up. It doesn't matter the food, although worse with meats. So if you eat a charred grilled burger or steak, you're pretty much exposing yourself to a lot of inflammation. But not that the protein's bad or the good kinds of fatty acids or fats are bad. It's just that you've changed some parts of that meat. Again, you can do the same thing if you roasted Brussels sprouts in the oven for 3 hours. Well, that's probably not good for you either. You've browned those, and those can become carcinogenic as well.
Yeah. So we're kind of introducing, and this thought I think has been circulating among smaller circles, but it needs to get out there. So I really appreciate you sharing this message that it's not just about your macros, protein, carbs, fats. Like, yeah, those are important, but really like the food processing, minimal processing, raw, adds a whole new dimension and element that we've kind of overlooked because we've been myopically focused on calories. Is it low glycemic or high glycemic? Is it keto or paleo? So this is a great conversation, that we're...
Yeah, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, unfortunately, when the ketogenic crowd or the paleo crowd or Mediterranean crowd, it doesn't matter. Then the idea is that the same principle applies to all of those kinds. And then also at the end of the day, all of those types of nutritional plans do the same thing hormonally for medical weight loss or weight loss, is that they all can lower insulin levels. They all tend to be lower carbs than what you're used to eating, and the lower the carbs, the less the insulin response, and the less the insulin response, the better the weight loss. But no one wants to talk about the carcinogenic effects, the processing of foods. It really needs to be the next topic.
Yeah, and I think people need to start growing their own foods, and then that involves another element of eating seasonally, rising and, going to bed with the rise of the sun because you want to get out and, harvest your vegetables and things like that, getting good microbes. Like, it incorporates everything that we've kind of been talking about. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. But I like that point that you said all these different diets kind of achieve, from a mechanistic standpoint, achieve a similar goal. vegans don't want to hear that about the keto people, and the keto people don't want to hear about that.
Right.
But we're kind of speaking a similar physiology, really, at some level.
A very good vegan vegetarian diet that's of plant-based, nutrient-dense foods, generally speaking, is going to be a low carb in nature. It's also going to be low protein, it's also going to be low fat, which I'm not necessarily for, but at the end of the day, the insulin levels with a properly balanced vegan diet is going to be a low insulin type of diet, low carb diet.
And so this can kind of circle back to our other discussion about the liver, because in a low insulin environment and low blood sugar environment, that triggers the liver to make more ketones, for example. And so the liver is a key organ here for a ketogenic diet. A lot of people are interested in this and subscribe to our channel to learn more about ketosis. And so I wanted to kind of add an element that you were talking about, so people also get into ketosis to lose weight. So they're detoxifying, they're losing, the burden on the liver is increased, right? So we're telling the liver to detox and make ketones and. So at what point, where do we kind of, if we were to put a hierarchy, should we do a detox first before we go die hard keto? What do you recommend there? Because I think it's some overlap.
So yes, I would recommend what people know as a detoxification step prior to getting into all of this. Because yes, you want to get the liver to be the best that it can be before doing all this work. And so, there's some commercial preps of it. You can make homemade kinds, whatever it is, and pick one and just stick with it and do it for 7 to 14 days before you start.
A lot of people are using like traditional things like boiling dandelion greens and things like that are used, that have been used in different cultures for years. Are you a big fan of some of that?
Yes, that would be okay. You can do some chia pudding as well, flaxseed. Any of those would be beneficial. Or if you don't want to figure out how to make something or what to make, TUDCA would be a good nutritional supplement to take.
Yeah. Is that found naturally in apricot kernels?
I'm not sure.
I can't remember where they get that, but I've heard about this compound, so it's interesting.
I'm not sure.
So let's kind of dive a little bit into ketosis. I know it's an aspect of your practice, a modified version. And first, a lot of people are using processed MCT oil and stuff like that, and it can be beneficial. But where do you kind of draw the line where we want people's bodies to kind of take over?
Fats and fatty acids probably the most misunderstood aspect on that macro side that we talk about. I think a lot of people talk about proteins. Yes, you want a high protein meal, low carb for that low insulin response. But at the end of the day, in ketosis, we're mobilizing ketones. But the question is, well, how did you get that ketone? And that ketone is made from fats and fatty acids, particularly fatty acids. And this is probably a tricky little subject because just like we talk about on the protein side, the essential amino acids, we need to talk about the essential fatty acids. And again, this is probably where some vegans and vegetarian people who are scientifically involved kind of understand it. Linoleic and alpha-linolenic acid and so on. Where I get a little bit concerned about pursuing a ketogenic diet is that the big one is that, well, let me just use all coconut oil. Well, if you ask someone, well, what's coconut oil? Well, if you really ask someone, they may say, well, it's a saturated fat. Well, but 100% of it is not. I mean, a lot of it is, 80% or so is saturated fat. But you can break down, if you kind of dive down into what are fatty acids, you got to be very precise in your terminology. For instance, since we're talking about coconut oil, well, coconut oil, about 80% saturated fat. But we didn't even discuss how long is that carbon chain to make that saturated fat. Is it a usable one? And you can talk about every kind of oil that way. You can't say olive oil. Olive oil is mostly an oleic acid, which is a monounsaturated fat, but many people wouldn't understand what an oleic acid is because it's found in other types of oils. It's just that olive oil has a high amount of it, and so does safflower oil. But the problem where people who get into ketosis can do harm in the long run is that there's some kinds of fats. We start accumulating them, and we will gummy up the phospholipid composition, the fatty acid composition of our cells. And then things stop to work. We now know that fatty acids, and especially phospholipids, are the gate system for a cell. So when people talk about insulin resistance or trying to figure out what's going on with dementia or other kinds of neurological conditions, well, it comes down to phospholipids. And those phospholipids are made from fatty acids. And so this idea that we can only focus on, say, good, quote unquote, good kinds of fats, coconut oil, all natural grass-fed butter, which is great. I'm not opposed to it, but you can't just rely on just those. You got to pick things like your essential fatty acids that typically or most abundantly come from vegetarian sources like chia seed and flaxseed and walnut and sunflower. But if your focus is to say that, well, yeah, lard is good, and that's as far as you're going to say, you might have problems in the long run. Yeah. Those are high in palmitic acid and stearic acid, and those will, eventually could be beneficial for a little while, but afterwards it'll cause biochemical problems.
This is such a brilliant conversation. I'm so grateful that we're having this, because I get a lot of people that comment on my YouTube channel. My wife and I really promote a diverse array of plant-based fats, soaking nuts and seeds, the ones that you mentioned, chia, flax, walnuts, Brazil nuts, you name it. Dietary diversity, I feel, is very important for a healthy microbiome and healthy body cell membranes, like you just said. But then we get these comments, people say, oh, well, Dr. Finney, he said, don't have any PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. And so I think people associate healthy plant fats with bad, because they don't know what a polyunsaturated fat is. And so let's just break that down, because I know Dr. Finney is a friend of yours and part of your organization. So I would love to just hear, just so that we set the bar straight on this.
We can talk about polyunsaturated fats. Of course, that all that means is you got a long carbon atom and it has multiple double bonds. But we have to describe that. What's the length of that carbon atom? Where are those double bonds? How many of those are all factors in trying to say this is a PUFA or a polyunsaturated fatty acid. So we do have need for some. Again, you have to pick which ones. And the human body mostly likes even chain fatty acids, and odd chain fatty acids not so much. And those are the ones we call renegade fatty acids. And you don't need a whole lot of those. And most of those come not only from our diet, a processed diet, but they can also come from infections and so on. So polyunsaturated fats, yes, in large quantities, no good. Is it to say all polyunsaturated fats are bad? No. That would be a misstatement as well, and especially in terms of cell receptor physiology or just cell membrane physiology. So you need a variety of them, which also goes to the idea of right now with fish oil. And fish oil is probably a topic can talk about it for a whole week. Unfortunately, that's just 2 fatty acids on the omega-3 side. Many people don't know that EPA and DHA, the quantity in our cells is super small. EPA only makes about 0.5 to 1% of a total cell. And DHEA only makes about 2 to 4%. So when people say, well, keep taking fish oil, well, no, you can't do that, because you'll start to tip the scale more towards the omega-3 side of family of fatty acids. And the omega-6 side will get sacrificed. What many people don't understand is that the omega-3 to omega-6 sides share in the middle the same enzymes. So if you start to tip to omega-3 by taking a bunch of fish oil, and a lot of it is unfortunately rancid because they use heat, and the heat changes the fat chemistry of it, you will move away. You will move all of the enzymes to that side, and omega-6 will get sacrificed in the sense that that's your pro-inflammatory side. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you get sick, if you get an infection, one, you won't be able to build a defense to prevent the infection, but if you did, you can't get over it. So this idea like, let's take omega-3s for the rest of our life daily, no, it's not the answer. It's not a panacea. Not to mention a lot of them on the market, even the top brand nutraceutical companies do not extract it correctly. It has to be cold extracted, very cold, critical cold extracted fatty acids from fish. And then now we're talking that you got a quality product. But do not take fish oil on a consistent basis. It's probably better to eat a little bit of fish twice a week, the cold water, fatty kind.
I think that's excellent advice. So many people have been overdoing fish oil for many years. We have probably a mutual friend, Mark Houston. He's been highlighting, I think, Floyd Chilton's research at Wake Forest to add in GLA, gamma-linolenic acid. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Gamma-linolenic. I always get confused with gamma-linoleic, but that's, anyway, long story. So, anti-inflammatory omega-6 fat from borage and black cohosh, I think? No. Borage, and what's the other sources?
You can also get it from
blackcurrant,
primrose oil.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, pairing those together to affect the inflammatory cascade. So I think that's a key point. Cycling your fish oil, key. And then looking for IFOS, the International Fish Oil Standards Group. They third-party test and will look at oxidation and everything to see if it's rancid. That's great. But okay, so omega-3s, we've made this huge emphasis on them, maybe because there's a business behind it, but we know the phospholipids comprise a huge part of the cell membrane. I know you do IV phospholipid therapy here. What are natural ways that we can help to improve, make sure our cell membranes are fluid and intact?
Well, that fluidity is, again, created by phosphatidylcholine, and the fatty acids involved are your oleic acid and palmitate fatty acid or palmitic acid. Again, this is where a variety of different foods would be beneficial. Some of them are plant-based fatty acids, some are meat-based. The end of the day, what you're really saying is that all essential fatty acids, in order to get proper cell membrane physiology, what you're doing is you're taking the sun, that's your energy source, it's hitting plants, they grow. You either eat the plants and get the fatty acids directly from the plants, or you eat the animal that naturally ate natural plants, and you eat that. Pick your choice. Obviously, getting it directly from the plant might be a little bit better. There's not a little bit of processing, but there's a variety of different things from that you need to balance on both sides. This is not a if or that. This is going to be always a little bit of both. This is where I think I mentioned in a lecture one time before, I'm not opposed to a non-vegetarian diet. I'm not opposed to a vegetarian diet. What I am is more a agnostic omnivore. I will eat it as long as it's good for me. And this is the problem right now, is that people think, well, I'm eating healthy, ain't I? Well, no, maybe you're not. So really, you want to pick a variety of different foods and not pick the same foods over and over, because you're limiting your fatty acids from just that pool of food. So if you said, well, I'm going to have steak 3 times a week, and the other times I'm going to have fish, well, you've just limited yourself. Or you said, well, I'm just going to have a salad every day, you've limited yourself. So phosphatidylcholine is found extensively in egg yolk, probably the best source. It's got about 50 milligrams of phosphatidylcholine per egg yolk. That's a lot. And you can naturally get it that way. Or if you eat, like I said, a variety of different foods, plant and animal, you're going to get all of the types of fatty acids that our body needs. The body will balance them out. The only problem that you can't solve is that the essential fatty acids have to come from the foods. You can't make those. So that's where walnuts and chia and flax come into play, sunflower seeds and so on.
Mm-hmm. To get the DHEA and EPA.
Yeah.
Great point. So when it comes to egg yolks, raw versus cooked?
Better yet is actually runny. And so if you overcook the egg, at least the yolk part, the phosphatidylcholine, some of it will get degraded. So the best way to make them is sous vide style. I think you probably know the underwater cooking of the egg. And depending on the temperature and the duration, you get this nice runny egg or a sunny side up.
That's what I do. Or I put it, instead of like a bulletproof coffee, I'll put in an egg yolk and mix it with a hand. Tastes amazing. We have our own backyard chickens too, so I know the source and what they're eating, and they get a ton of exercise. So it's a deep, rich, orange yolk.
Yeah, that's high in phosphatidylcholine.
Yeah, I love it. Love the egg yolks. So let's kind of finish off with your. You said it's kind of a variation of a ketogenic diet, more 70% fat. I'd imagine you really personalize the diet based upon where people are at, how much weight they need to lose, or what's going on biochemically. But let's get your perspective on the ketogenic diet.
My answer is always physiological answers. If you look at the human body composition, forget water for a moment. That's the vast majority of what makes up the human body. But otherwise, we're 20% fats and fatty acids, 15% proteins, and the rest, 55% being water. And the rest is really divided up into vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates. And carbohydrates only make about 2% of the human body. So with that said, you want to kind of gear your foods to resemble the human body composition. So for neurological I treat some neurological conditions, a variety of different them. And we use what's called a membrane stabilizing diet that was passed on by Dr. Patricia Kane at Body Bio. And in that's a modified ketogenic diet. So we're focusing on about 60% fats. You can count, say, 30% proteins, and then the remainder is carbohydrates. And of course, it's got to be nutrient dense. And so that kind of diet actually kind of reflects regenerative kind of methods. So you're going a little higher on fats, all the different kinds, especially essential fatty acids, and some proteins, and then the rest being carbs. And now you've created a good scenario for the cells to repair themselves.
I love that. That's a beautiful, beautiful approach. So do you have people just kind of look at their plate and divide it 70%? Like, how do we implement this on a practical level?
I don't try to make it too complicated. Yeah, you can look at your plate, and 3/4 of it should be some kind of plant, and off to the corner should be your animal protein, but only if it's all natural.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And it sounds to me, I inferred from this, and you said it a couple of times, diversity is key, right? So I think a lot of us get comfortable making certain foods. We like certain foods, so we always get T-bone steak, and we always get this grain or this, whatever. So it sounds to me like a wide variety is good. And can we implement, there's some theories emerging that ketosis is kind of a cyclical physiological event, in the sense, like more in the winter, depending upon where people are from, their ancestry. Do you buy into that?
Oh yeah, this is by far, we're actually going back to our roots. And ketosis is not a new thing. It's 100% physiological as to how the body operates. Because you couldn't always find convenient foods in your refrigerator or the corner store, so you had to take the time to find food. If you did, then you finally ate it, and then you'd rest, and then take the time off to rest, and eventually go back and find food. So ketosis, with the idea of what we used to, with the way we used to live, was intermittently fast. So you weren't starving yourself. You didn't say, I didn't have any food. You'd constantly find food, eat it, find food, eat it, and that takes time. So in between eating food and not eating food, you spend a lot of time in ketosis. That's just natural. That's not something that we just thought up of. So I think this is probably where all of us should move to, is this idea of eating just a little bit when you're hungry and then waiting.
I love that. But people do want the prescription, the protocol, tell me when to eat. You know, they want a little bit more granular details. Do you find that when people get more and more healthy, they become kind of more intuitive eaters and become more confident in their decision making? At first, they need their hand held a little bit, or?
Yes, and I think that's where a good nutritional plan comes in handy. What do I have for breakfast? What do I have for lunch? If you're even hungry, you have to say, am I hungry? Many people don't even realize they're not hungry. They're doing it out of convenience because they're looking at their watch, saying, I got to get to work, I have to get to school, or whatever it might be. So yes, you have to create a little bit of structure, and there's a lot of easy foods that people don't think of. It's not wrong to mix up foods and say, we have this conception that breakfast must be a certain kind of foods, lunch is a certain kind of foods, and dinner is a certain kind of foods. We got to get away from that and say that, yes, it's okay to have eggs for dinner, or leftovers from dinner for breakfast, and so on. So in my clinic, we first answer the question, are you hungry? Because if you're not in the morning, don't worry about it. Move on. Have some water, have a little bit of coffee, have a little bit of tea, or some bone broth or something like that, and wait till you're hungry. It might be lunch, it might be a late lunch, it might be an early dinner. And again, we're stuck on these words, like we are trying to say, well, dinner has got to be after 5:30 or something. No, it doesn't have to be. It really should be when you're hungry. So easy, simple things is all you need. If you said, I'm just not a very good cook, well, great, that's okay. You can go to the store, pick up some organic, non-GMO mixed green salads and put some variety of different vegetables on there. If you're non-vegetarian, buy some chopped meat. It doesn't have to be very complicated. Dinner is very simple. I mean, I think a lot of people say, well, I'm not a cook. How do you make some chicken? Well, I don't know. All you have to do is put some natural butter in the pan, a little bit of coconut oil, season it with salt and pepper, and just let it cook there. And pick 2 vegetables that you like, chop them up and saute them in some, a little bit of oil or no oil, or just steam it. And it doesn't have to be, a chef-made kind of meal. I think that's where, even for myself, when I first started cooking, I did simple things before getting to complex things. No one's asking you to make a souffle. Yeah. Just quick preparation of foods is easy to do, especially if you can plan not to eat out. So a lot of Americans don't plan ahead for a variety of different reasons. But if you prepare it the night before, it's just one thing you don't have to do the next day. So creating a salad and putting a little glass container and taking it with you to work, probably like step one.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, progress begets more progress and begets more progress. So yes. You may not know how to cook anything, but people can turn on a pan and, like you said, butter, ghee, coconut oil, and you can start there, and then you're going to get better and better, more confident over time, which is fantastic. So I really enjoyed talking with you. This was amazing. We have 3 final questions, well, 4 now. 4 final questions. We've asked close to 210 some odd people. But we know successful people that are impacting the world, have a morning routine, a set of rituals, things that you do first thing in the morning. So Dr. D, what does your first couple hours every day look like?
Actually, it starts before the night before. I tend to not stay up very late. I do not watch TV in the bedroom. I try to go to sleep by 9:30, 10, at the latest 10:30. It really starts there. Before you can say what happens in the morning, what happened last night. I try not to eat late, and so that I get a good night's sleep.
What does that look like? Like 7 p.m. you cut off, or?
I usually get up naturally by about 5:30 or 6.
Oh, sorry. When do you finish your meal?
Oh, I try to finish my meal by 6:30 or 7 every night. Mm-hmm. And so give a couple of hours of time for digestion. And there is this part of our nervous system called the rest and digest part. While you're eating, you actually trigger the other part, the sympathetic nervous system. So for a little while, cortisol levels go up. You got to let that time pass by for a little bit. So it typically takes about 2 hours. Yeah. So that's why I try to finish up by 7 at the latest. And then I get ready for bed. like I said, I don't watch TV in my bedroom. That's only done in the family room.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
But
And
getting
then-
up in the morning, I think not much different from anyone else, except that I do check myself to make sure that if I'm not hungry, all I will have is a cup of tea or a cup of coffee with natural sweeteners like stevia.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Any spiritual or meditation type practice?
I'm Hindu by nature, so I take time to reflect on my own previous day, the day's events, or what's going to be happening in the coming day. I usually do that in bed, and it doesn't take very long, but you're just listening to yourself. How do you feel about what's going to happen in the rest of the day? How do you feel about your body? Are you hurting or not hurting? Listen to your own breathing. I only spend about 5 or 10 minutes doing that and then get out of bed.
Yeah. So you're stranded on a desert island and you can only bring one whole food, herb nutrient, or some botanical with you. Vitamin D and omega-3s are covered. What's coming with you?
Well, if I could only eat one food, I'd have to say it would be a seafood. It would have to be a type of fish. If that fish eats vegetarian all of its life, or some fish eat other fish, but vast majority of them eat a variety of different things. So my thing to eat for the rest of my life would be fish. The next thing, as far as a supplement, it's not one thing though. It's actually what I recommend at my clinic is a multivitamin and mineral. So if you can put it, say, in one capsule or one tablet, that's going to be it. Yeah. Versus taking vitamin D3 or vitamin K2 or any of the other ones. So those would be the two things, because between that fish and that multivitamin, I pretty much have it covered.
That's awesome. Love it.
But that's only if you limit me to those choices.
We do try and limit people just to hear what they feel is very important. And the next question kind of goes along those same lines. If there was just one activity or one movement pattern that you could only do, you're limited to that. For some people it's hiking, some people it's squatting, some people it's gardening, something that you feel is really, really important. What would that activity be?
That's very easy, and that's walking. Walking accomplishes lots of different things, but in terms of use of a vast majority of muscle groups, walking does it. Core, upper, lower, balance, all of that is achieved. Not to mention it's purposeful. So you can get from point A to point B with walking as well. Yeah. So that's it for me.
So final question here. If you were to be in an elevator with a congressman or a parliament member involved in influencing health policy, and they turned to you and said, Dr. Krishna, as a medical doctor, obesity medicine specialist, what sort of lifestyle tips or understanding of nutrition would you want me to understand and know about so that I can influence the masses? What do you think has the highest hit rate from a policy level?
Well, unfortunately, I've done some of that advocacy work. And if I could have that conversation, it's not it would seem like to most politicians, or even the general public for that matter, almost unachievable. But I would say, our nutrition has to focus on real food, and that's it. It's that the moment you get away from real food, all of the chronic conditions that we see in the health industry start from there. So raw food, unfortunately, is not seen even in our school system, which is heavily government subsidized. And I think the previous definition of two vegetables was ketchup and potato. Mm-hmm. And potato is not even a vegetable. But that's really unfortunate that this is what politicians think of as a healthy diet. And that's unfortunately affecting our future children. They're the leaders and they're the workers. And that's where it's got to start.
Do you think it's going to start from the change, that is, the top down, or it's got to be a kind of a bottom up? Communities, advocates, parents are going to...
It's a little bit of all, but unfortunately or fortunately, our school system is such that it's mostly public. And those who can or cannot afford school lunches or school meals are now at the mercy of those who serve them. and what's being served is not quality food. And so I'd have to pick that, yeah, it's got to be from a little bit, again, both ways, but top down at this point. Because there's too much, it's impossible to control all the variables. And while parents can clearly pick, they should be also educated to say that here's the kind of foods that need to come. I mean, that's at school, that's health education. But they're not talking about health like that. They're talking about weird stuff nowadays that makes no sense from a nutritional standpoint. So it's a little bit of both, but I think at the end of the day, it's got to come from top down.
Dr. Krishna Doniparthi, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was a lot of fun. We covered a lot of bases. If folks want to connect with you online and learn more about what you do, and you said at a lecture, several times throughout the talk, you said, I must have said this during a lecture. What is it? Do you speak a lot, or is there certain groups you speak to?
Yeah, I do some lecturing at both the Obesity Medicine Association and a few other associations, both nationally and internationally, on nutrition and metabolism. But most of it is done at OMA, Centers for Medical Weight Loss would be other ones.
Okay.
But I do smaller lectures for physicians for very specific things on the fatty neurological side, fatty acid neurological side, and on the addiction side.
Yeah, unfortunately we didn't even get to talk about that. Maybe in brief, you do IV NAD?
Yes.
It's really cool. Next time we can catch up on that. And what are some of the conditions that you treat neurologically?
Wow, that's a long list. Everything from ADD, ADHD, autism, spectrum disorders to neural Lyme, Parkinson's, dementia, ALS, environmental toxicology issues, mold, naturally all cleared with the proper phospholipid treatment.
Maybe we'll catch up again and talk more about that. And so if folks want to connect with you, your website?
Yes, it's Functional Medicine GA, stands for Georgia.com, functionalmedicinega.com.
functionalmedicinega.com. All right, guys, if you're still here, I am so grateful that you're still listening. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend or family or someone that may benefit, and we'll catch you on the next episode.